So I just finished season 1 of Iron Fist, and I gotta say, I kind of enjoyed it. I just don't know who I would recommend it to. So I put up a review of the very first episode of this right after I watched it to just give my very first impressions of it. And before you watch this review, it's probably important that you check out that review because it'll fill in kind of some details. This show's a little bit tricky to review because the first story arc, the first 4 or 5 episodes, feel like a totally different show from the last 7 episodes or so. And in that, if you check out my first review, that kind of gives you a vibe of what the very beginning is like. And as I review this, I'm going to go more into what the show is like as it goes along. But before I go into my full review and start talking about it, spoiler free here, what did you think about it? Tell me in the comments section, did you just the first few episodes kind of throw you off completely to the show? In this review, I'll try and convince you to give it a little bit more time. Or did you actually enjoy the whole thing? Tell me what you thought in the comment section. With that, let's get started. So Iron Fist tells the story of Danny Rand, a kid that grew up in a super rich family in New York City, but when he was like 10, 13 years old, his family was in a plane crash and presumed dead, and everyone else died except him, and he ended up being raised by monks and grew up to end up becoming the Iron Fist, sworn enemy of the Hand. But even in that description right there, you can see where there's a problem with this show, because the first 4 or 5 episodes are all about Danny Rand attempting to convince the world that he is Danny Rand. And because his family was so rich and powerful, that means if he's alive, he has a 51% stake in this big, gigantic, powerful corporation, and therefore people don't want him to gain power of that. The second half of the season is all about him doing kung fu fights with the Hand and trying to stop this evil organization. You can see how these are 2 very different shows that make for a very odd mesh to like put them together into one the way that they did it. On paper, you can see where it would be kind of interesting, primarily because we've seen the movie Batman Begins, which kind of touches on some of these similar types of things of rich, powerful guy who returns after many years of being presumed dead. But here, it dedicates 4, 5, 6 episodes to that struggle in and of itself. And so by the time you get over to the Kung Fu Battle mystery organization stuff, it's already lost so many people that, I've talked to so many people who have told me, I gave up after the first 2 episodes, first episode, third episode. But with all that said, Cinderella has decided to join me as we talk about the good in Iron Fist. Right off the bat, one of the things that really works for me is just, I find this gigantic shared universe that's the movies, that's these TV shows on Netflix, that's the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Just there's something very addictive about all these shows being pulled together into this one universe. And so right off the bat, I find it interesting just on that level. But beyond that, the story of it with just kind of these secret societies and stuff, big corporations, some of it, how they break into them, not break into them, but integrate their sleeper agents into the whole society, that gets really interesting to me. It's big conspiracy type stuff, not Illuminati and kind of Illuminati-ish, kind of with these secret shadow organizations that are running things like that, except a comic booky version of that. That's interesting to me. One of the things I've heard a lot of people criticize to some extent is the fight choreography. I don't see it. I disagree. I see what they're saying because they're comparing it to Daredevil. Like, these fights don't compare to Daredevil. I would say that's true, but I don't think that's a very good bar to set because Daredevil is so good with the fights and they do so much with the time and the budget that they have that expecting another show to do that is an unreasonable expectation, and therefore I can't hold that against the show. And I also think it has its own unique side. If you watch this not as trying to be like Daredevil, but as a kung fu movie influenced TV show, like old chopsocky 70s, early 80s chopsocky kung fu, these fights start to make a little bit more sense, especially as the season kind of continues onward. And there's a lot of things in it that are very distinctly kung fu movies, Hong Kong kung fu movies, not American martial arts movies, Hong Kong kung fu movies. There's a scene in this that's drunken boxing. So if you've seen Drunken Master 2, Drunken Master, Legend of the Drunken Master, if you want to go by the United States side of Drunken Master 2, there's drunken boxing in this. So that's what this show is, and I think some people have kind of missed that about them. Some of the cast is also really good, entertaining along the way. They always get some great cast members in these shows. I don't know the actor's name, but he's like he's the father figure on the evil family side of it that's kind of in the secrets. I forget his name. He was in 300. So he's just a lot of fun to watch in this show all along the way. And then also like Trinity from The Matrix, Carrie-Anne Moss. She shows up in it, and she's like the most likable, and you can see where this character is much more enjoyable than seeing Jessica Jones, where you hated her. So those are some elements that really kind of worked for me. And once the story gets going, and it starts getting into the stuff with the hand, whereas the hand was the weakest elements of Daredevil, and when it tied in kind of over there, it just felt like, oh man, we're getting away from the really good stuff. Here, it's the best elements, and it makes sense because Iron Fist is the sworn enemy of the hand, and so you get to dive into these cultures and how there's multiple sects of the hand and how all these different pieces to it work and how not everyone knows everything going on, and you get a better perspective, and it just builds this mythology that, once again, like I said, ties back to this big, gigantic MCU and all these elements fitting together. That's something that I enjoyed quite a bit once it got going. With all that said, it's not great. There's a reason that this has under 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. There's a reason a lot of people are dropping out of this show pretty quickly. So let's talk about the bad. And so with that said, right, I mean, the biggest problem with the show is it just feels like it can't decide what show it's trying to be, which somewhat ties also to our lead character that can't decide who he wants to be or what he's trying to be. So as for the show, like I said, the first 4 or 5 episodes is all about a guy trying to prove who he is, and so then there's like forced in fights in it. Like, so there are fights, but they seem kind of forced, and there's all the like legal dramas, and we see our main guy in board meetings, and all this stuff's going on, and you're like, this is Iron Fist? This is a Marvel series? Like, what am I watching right now? And then the second half turns into what you think it's going to be, but it keeps tying back to some of this weird, even CW-esque is a lot of comparisons people are making, and not necessarily love triangles, but sort of, you know, triangle relationships and melodrama and the way people interact with each other. And why don't you trust me? Well, trust goes both ways. Well, if you trust, that sermonizing that you see on Arrow all the time, you start to see that. And it's like they just couldn't quite figure out what they wanted to do with it. And some of that's where, likewise, our main character is kind of one of the biggest problems with this show, because he's not a lead character. He doesn't feel like a lead character. He's not compelling enough. Certainly not the way they characterize him here, as kind of a misguided soul that can't find his place in the world. And that's kind of what his character feels like in this, because he, you know, wasn't raised in the West. He's raised in the East. Becomes the Iron Fist, but still wants to resolve things back home. And there's all this kind of turmoil in him. So he's kind of undefined in who he's at, and inherent to the character that he was chosen to be the Iron Fist, you would think within that there'd be a great opportunity for kind of, he's the chosen one, will he accept his fate? Like, there's a lot of emotional things that have resonated very much so in things like The Matrix and any number of other things where there's the chosen one type character that are not present here at all. He just doesn't come off very heroic. He doesn't come off very the chosen one. All these types of things that you should feel, you just don't feel. And if he was like the secondary character, if he was one of many characters, I'm sure he'll be great in The Defenders. But as the lead character we're following in this, it doesn't quite work right. And so that's kind of the frustration in seeing this character. But as I mentioned before, I did a review of the first episode, and one of the things I talked about the lead character is that he kind of comes off like this homeless, fish out of water, stoner type character, in which case he doesn't come off particularly heroic or particularly purposeful, so he doesn't draw you into the things that you normally kind of want out of a Marvel show. So like Daredevil, Matt Murdock doesn't come off a particularly charismatic lead guy because he's so dedicated to being a hero that in and of itself that becomes likable and interesting. This is just a guy that's the chosen one to stop the hand from taking over the world, that's just kind of wandering around like, hey, can I get into the board meetings? And then like there's episodes in this where he's in board meetings and he's making decisions and you're hearing it and you're just going, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, am I supposed to be rooting for him because he has this simplistic Buddhist mindset of profit's evil, let's do what's best for mankind? Like, am I supposed to be rooting for him simply because he's saying that? Because I'm not. Like, in the next scene, someone goes, if we do this, we're not going to have the prophets to be able to research new technologies and new medicines that'll save thousands of lives. Right. That's really important. The show continues on, and from there, it makes the point that, yeah, he was right that they shouldn't be working for all these evil prophets, but they ignore the fact that those prophets are how they're able to fund research. Like, it's all a lot more complicated than just corporations are evil. but the show kind of presents that type of morality. So anyway, beyond that, the show kind of dwindles and it goes off in so many different directions that it's also kind of difficult to kind of get a grasp of what I'm supposed to be rooting for, who's supposed to be the bad guy. And some of that's good because there's twists and turns, but it doesn't build momentum of there's this big evil thing that needs to be stopped. It's just kind of stuff kind of keeps happening and moving around, and it doesn't draw you in a way that these binge-worthy shows, the Netflix shows that you're supposed to watch in one sitting, it doesn't do that as best as it could because you're just not compelled by this lead character. You're confused by the main story, and it goes off in so many different directions that you get a little bit lost in it. And I can completely understand why so many people dropped off early on or finished it and were like, that sucked. I totally get it, though I enjoyed it myself. So he's supposed to be the Iron Fist, and throughout the whole season, it's like, man, my cheese off. I can't really use the Iron Fist. And he only uses it a little bit until kind of the last episode is when you really get to see him do some Iron Fist stuff. But it's not like it's an origin story that pulls at your strings, that you're like rooting as this guy. Like I love stories of becoming, where someone becomes something. So like Batman Begins, I love it because it's an origin story. So I guess maybe that's to say I love origin stories. But that stuff's very powerful for me. Same reason The Matrix is so powerful for me is these stories of becoming. That's not what this really is at all in the way it plays out in the story arcs. It's not that. And we don't get like him going nuts with the Iron Fist power or anything like that. It really is a whole lot of him like, man, my cheese down. I can't do it, bro. But also, last kind of criticism of it, and that's the problem that you hear a lot about with Marvel movies and with DCEU movies, is that now that they have these big, expansive shared universes, as soon as you do a standalone story and things, it's like, they're going to blow up the city. Who can help us? And then everyone in the audience thinks, all of your buddies from the last movie, just call Hulk, call Thor, call Iron Man, just call all these people and save the day. It's pretty straightforward and simple. Why don't you do that? All of these Marvel Netflix shows take place in New York City. So, and they're tied together, where the Rosario Dawson character, and there's all these scenes in it where she's saying, you can't do this alone. You can't fight the Hand on your own. I've seen people try to fight the Hand. You can't do it, man. And so every time he's about to go fight the Hand and she gives the lecture, you immediately think to yourself, why don't you call Daredevil? Why don't you call him up? Like, it's New York City, bad traffic, tons of congestion. He might not be able to help you today. Just hold off one day. He'll meet you up. You guys we'll just kind of make this happen. The two of you guys together, you probably can beat him because you guys are both pretty awesome. No, that's not what happens. And Daredevil's got his own set of friends, so he can bring along more people to defeat the Hand. That's not what happens. She goes, you can't do this. Why don't you go with your new friend that you met at the dojo? Like, I mean, it's just, you're watching it and you're just like angry. Like, no, Matt Murdock is down the road. Give him a phone call. You have his number. You know him. You know where Danny Rand, the Iron Fist, can find help, and you're just not offering it. How sick and twisted are you? Do you want him to die? That's kind of a problem. So with all that said, I really did enjoy the show. I did not love it at all. I didn't think it was great, very good. It was good enough for me, though. I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. It's a show that if you're kind of really into the Marvel Netflix shows, give it a shot. Maybe even if you hate the first episode, skip ahead to episode 6 and see if that one kind of pulls you in. But I'm not going to try and convince you. There's a lot of messiness in the story. There's some issues with the lead character not being charismatic and good, well enough written character to carry a show. There's a lot of those issues. But there's a lot of the strengths of the world building and the intricacies of storytelling of who's good, who's bad, the back and forth that you've enjoyed if you've enjoyed the other Netflix shows. But I am definitely not going to try and convince you that you need to like this show because it really is a mess, and I totally get it if it is not a show for you. But how about you? Tell me your thoughts on the comment section. I don't want to just talk about Iron Fist. I want to talk about Iron Fist with you. With that said, if you're new to my channel, please consider clicking that subscribe button. And if you've already subscribed to my channel and you're one of my regular viewers, please consider trying to support me on Patreon. You can click on the link in my description below. I'm trying to do some bigger, more expansive stuff like my movie trivia show, and it just takes a lot more time and actually has some expenses on my end. So if you want me to do more ambitious stuff and kind of give some feedback on what I'm doing, consider clicking on that Patreon page and supporting me over there. It would mean the world to me. I love to talk movies, but really, I love to talk about movies with you. Join me in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.